gains in automation, it goes to the owner class. All you have to do is have everyone be an owner, and now suddenly any gain in automation is a gain for everyone. If you grow just one thing, it might not grow as well as if it grows with another thing. A good example of that is called the Three Sisters method.
There is definitely multi-apartment buildings or multi-families that do
$100 million that they gave to Joe Rogan that they would kind of be out if they reach contract. Is that a bigger number, or is 2 billion a bigger number?
I don't know,
It's a
Zach.
tough one. I
It's
know,
really hard.
and maybe
Yes.
comparing numbers is not Jeremy's strong. Gotta go kill a Jenny.
I still don't think you should kill her. I don't think it's a good idea.
It's a ghost, dude. Welcome back, everybody, to the Bread Theory program. I have joining me tonight Dan Platt of the Albany Greens. How are you doing tonight, Dan?
proud to be back at Bread Theory.
Yeah.
On hiatus from left field. Shall return.
Yeah.
To take a theory break because we need to get back to theory sometimes. I was watching, listening to. Sometimes I listen. I check in on left-leaning streamers like Actual Jake.
I like him.
And yeah, he's sort of enjoyable, but also kind of a dumbass at the same time. He's sort of stupid, as one channel is called, because he knows it, but because he had an aggravating conversation argument, 3 hours. Didn't listen to all of it. Maybe I will eventually because it's just during lunch. But I listened to about an hour of it, and it basically was circular between a guy who has a class analysis, but not a feminist one, and doesn't quite. He's like, he needs to be sold on not what the patriarchy is, which Jake could keep explaining, but was circular about it because he couldn't explain why one would believe the patriarchy is a thing.
Oh.
I mean, I guess he just seemed to keep relying on like its self-evident nature, and he wouldn't kind of try to jab on, like he was trying to he was coming from a negative point of view, or a deductive point of view of, well, why don't you believe in the patriarchy? When the guy, being a kind of logic-pilled sort of guy, was, he needs to be convinced, what is the evidence of the patriarchy? Or why would one, his main beef was, why would one need to believe that there's a patriarchy? And Jake and other, let's say pseudo, leftists who need to read more theory.
Sure.
So they can relate, like he can relate the whats and whys of theory, but he doesn't read a lot, so he doesn't really know the why and the what, like what's the evidence, right? You don't have to read real academia about like it, but you can at least the basic theoretical texts of feminism.
Mm-hmm.
And because otherwise, like, he couldn't ask him about, like, so have you read any feminist writers, and what do you disagree with them? Like, where do you think they're going wrong?
Sure.
He didn't ask that, and couldn't, because if he did, he would have to be able to cite them, or at least have a general idea of what the thesis of Judith Butler or Octavia, any of some of the writers I have behind me. He can sort of get across the concepts, which is fine. That's like a level of education. But then there's the deeper education, like if you're going to really argue about this stuff, you kind of need to know it, at least somewhat more, so you can refer to it and say, like, well, in this book, that's the thesis, and particularly explanatory power. The reason why, so they're arguing about particularly incels and what it takes to deconvert them or to break them out of their self-hatred with a worldview that is, he kind of the not Jake guy kind of figures in a class way, and Jake sticks to, well, it's misogyny and patriarchy that caused them to have this self-hatred. He's correct, but he needs to be able to explain how, why, and the other guy is convinced that you only need a class analysis, that there's a ruling class, and and they're but Jake would keep kind of coming around to the explanatory power of, or rather, like kind of the taking for granted that's like, yes, they make money by through patriarchal values,
Sure.
like a misogyny, or this misogyny that make have the self-hatred, but that wasn't enough for this guy. And what I would kind of go for, as I was thinking about, like, what would I be saying differently, or what kind of conversation I would have, questions to ask, was like, okay, well, I explained that, like, class, especially, or economic class, is not alone can explain the phenomenon of the incel.
Right.
Because clearly we are just as exploited. We are exploited by the capitalist class. We are within the mode of production. As Jake would mention this too, by the way. That's like, we're in capitalism. He would refer to it, but that was almost supporting the other guy's position, where it's like, yes, capitalism is, but he doesn't see it as a problem. He didn't say he was like, he said he was a capitalist. Just that, like, the ruling class needs, I don't know, I guess he's just a standard Democrat guy.
Sure.
But trying to wrap my head around, like, the how to get across that, class or economic class is not alone to explain why these guys hate each other and these class inequality, these sexual inequalities. Like, he would refer to them, Jake, but he didn't put it in terms of these class inequalities. That, like, he was trying to get across that sexual inequality supports the economic inequality of capitalism. Particularly, though, that it predates capitalism. So you kind of he can go back to religious conservative institutions, and it isn't particular capitalism. Right? Misogyny's source is not from capitalist logic. I think that's actually where you kind of go to.
Yeah.
That these lines of oppression are not just capitalist, and they're not the source. They intersect because capitalist logic is not in conflict with patriarchy, nationalism. In fact, maybe nationalism is different, because you can say that the nation state does not exist without capitalism. They are mutual and symbiotic. But certainly patriarchy existed, because his counter argument was, of course, like the bullshit of some women are successful. You have some queens. You have some middle ages women landowners and nobles. Like, and Jake is like, yeah, they're the exceptions.
Right.
And it's like, and he says, like, and their stories aren't being held up. Like, yeah, why aren't they being held up? Because of the patriarchy. But he kind of says it like it's self-evident, and he shouldn't have stopped there, or he couldn't go beyond that. So the conversation goes in a circle, and that's, that's the frustrating part. It leads to frustration. So maybe, like, there needs to be a point where you stop and go, like, it seems we need to read our feminist theory, so then we could, both of us, so then we could discuss what we, how it relates to what our positions are, and maybe our positions will change.
Yeah, that's totally fair. And yeah, that's the thing about theory. It does improve your arguments. It improves your thinking. It can't be the end-all, be-all, but it's certainly going to help form a foundation so that, hopefully you can get more people on your side.
Yeah, a few more days ago, another Jake video was with this Destiny head guy. He wasn't stupid, in fact. Like, the guy's evolving, but his issue is with this other guy, and of course they're all like white men, but it doesn't matter. That his entire political thinking or his worldview is entirely from YouTube. And I want to get across that, like, that is the equivalent of learning math through, like, I don't know, actually, maybe I need to formulate this better. But there's getting something secondhand, but when you're learning from YouTube, videos or commentary, you're getting things fourth hand.
Yes, it's a copy
Right?
of a copy of a copy, sort of a
Because
situation.
let's say theory not being a true representation of objective reality because it's being interpreted by the theoretician or the scientist or the social scientist. Well, it's secondhand. Let's say theory is the second hand of reality. Well, then someone interpreting, like a lecturer or a professor or some other Marxist or whatever thinker,
Sure.
they're third hand from the original text,
Right.
right? And then you'll have a commenter on Twitch or YouTube then giving their opinion on a lecture, or they're reacting to a video about it. So now it's fourth hand.
Right.
And now, you know, and then the guy who's lapping it up is like he's now when he repeats something from Vosh, it's sixth hand. That's a lot of steps. The Xerox copy is usually used as the
Exactly.
metaphor.
Yeah. A little bit of the details are lost each iteration.
Well, not just the details, but just like the underlying why and epistemology.
Context, yes.
And context.
Yeah.
So this guy was like, he's rethinking so he was like a socialist for a time, but only because he like found Vosh to be the best at arguing, which is a terrible standard for judging the truth of something or veracity.
See, this has been my
Who can
assumption
argue for
a
it
while.
best?
Yeah.
The guy's 20 or 22. He's not that old, but he's college age. But like he grew up in a religious household. He's deconverted. He was like hitch-pilled and a new atheist.
Sure.
But he's 22 now. So like he's going through what like maybe you and me went through 20 years ago.
Sure.
Now about 20 years, not quite,
No,
but almost there.
20 years ago.
I mean, I'm about 14 years out of college. But he has nothing else. He's read nothing else from what I could tell. The way he talked about things, of course, he was like acting and arguing like someone who's just completely just all his socialization about acting and thinking has been from YouTube and online. So I don't think he's read a thing because his like, I liked Vosh and I got everything from Vosh and he admits that he had a real parasocial relationship and it was very dogmatic.
Oh, yeah.
But then after the tax folder incident, he was like, well, this guy's a hypocrite and I need to rethink all of my positions.
I think
so
I
that
heard
includes
this debate, actually.
this includes
familiar.
Oh really?
Yeah,
It's not, I don't think it's that old since this is post Vosh's tax folder.
Yeah.
But
it was pretty recent. It was in the last couple of weeks, I think.
yeah. But yeah, that just goes to show like the parasocial relationship is so dangerous because like the guy was listening to Vosh but no other socialists.
Right?
Like, and it just shows like what it and that's this is a critique we went over like years ago now, when I really started like Vosh bad, streaming.
Yeah.
Was that like he is a dead end. This was pointed out by what other YouTuber was doing. He did a breakdown of like the left funnel, like not the pipeline but a funnel.
Oh.
Where we want to funnel people towards actual activism, and there's the levels, with Tassan being like the entry level.
Sure.
But then there are tumors where like you get into their community or you get into being in their audience and they're a dead end.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to lose any audience, so they don't pass any. In fact, they go out of their way to left bash and denigrate other lefty streamers or any other sources or anything or organizations even, so that they don't break the parasocial. And that's Vosh in a nutshell. Why he's a complete scumbag. Even if he can be mildly entertaining at times. I was watching him a little bit again, but I don't know why. Oh, you know why? Because the algorithm just will throw Vosh at me.
Yeah.
And so it's like, as long as, just the 10-minute, clip chimps.
Sure.
But anyway, on the practical level, I want to get across that I did the Socialist Party conference this last weekend.
Oh, cool.
Pretty small gathering, like 20 people, maybe 25 max. Didn't get a head count. But the opening where everyone was showing up was roughly 20 people. And so Socialist Party, not a large organization by any stretch. I think their national membership is like a few thousand or something like that.
Sure. Is this the PSL we're talking about, or is it a different?
No, this is SP.
As just the SP.
Okay. Their main thing they do on a national level is simply run a presidential candidate that won't have any ballot lines. Mimi Scholtek was the last one, and then a member was our Green Party vice presidential candidate with Howie. So it was something of a joint venture, which they don't do unless we're doing it with sufficiently socialist candidate. They're pretty insular and partisan. It's so strange. Like, what is different about this group than PSL? And I know it's like the split happened like 20 years ago or 30 years ago. If you look into the reason, it was like some kind of, usually an internationalist reason, like what their opinion of like operating in the global order, like position on the Sino-Soviet split, between Maoists and Leninists would be the source of some of these splits. But it's like, why not recombine? Because obviously we're in a completely different context. But anyway, highlights, because I only really did 3 or 4 talks, was a party within party idea, which I think I've heard before, but there are structural impediments to it, where you have an organization or a party that will have ballot lines, but in order to have the heft of a mass leftist party, which we kind of, when we talk about a unified left party, it has organizations as members. So you do not join this party on the individual level. It is parties that join as part of a coalition, primarily just as an electoral force, with a stronger ballot line potential. So with a minimalist platform made up of electoral reform and a constitutional convention, particularly, like doing all that election reform via constitutional convention, because it needs to be everywhere.
Yeah.
And that is something that like progressives will not go for. So like, but thinking that we'll like have progressives but it's minimalist just for that. But you are still electing people on a leftist or left-leaning platform, or at least in like a label. So it wouldn't be a coalition with libertarians and other right-leaning, because as you're building up to the Constitutional Convention, you're also governing local level or eventually state level. So I like the idea, but the reason there's an impediment there is that in many states, I don't know, maybe it's all of them, that you need to be, in order to be a party, you need individual registers, people registered individually. So it's, unless when an organization becomes a member, all members change their registration to this new ballot line. That's sort of difficult. It's not automatic. Never mind, like having the discipline for everyone who's maybe a member, a due-paying member, to be told, and that if you're going to keep being a member, you're basically going to register as this left unity party. Let alone everyone who's registered as a green in other states or whatever, who are just registered. Getting them to change their registration is a task, since people individually will say they'll do what's best for them based on their individual opinions. Like there are people who will not work with the Greens because of our national position on Ukraine. I just did some phone banking, and one of the guys I reached will still want to be affiliated on the local level, as far as keep me on your email list. I like that. I get updates from you. I'm glad to get them. But I will change my registration to Democrat because I'm an Army vet, and Stein's position is surrender on Ukraine, and that's his interpretation, and he is pro NATO. He's not a true internationalist. It's sort of like it's really difficult to have everyone line up completely with a party's platform. Basically, if the platform is you can find leftists who will be nationalists and not internationalist thinkers, and you can have internationalists who won't be on board for like degrowth socialism. So it's difficult to, I don't know. I guess there needs to be that hard line commitment to third party politics first, regardless of positions that the party may come up with or consent on that you don't like. And I'm wondering what my line will be, like if, say, something happens on the Green Party nationally that could be a last straw, and then like, okay, I guess I have to shift to one of the partisan socialist orgs.
Yeah.
I don't know what it would take, though. I suppose it would, if there's like this full, I don't know. Now, even if it was Bernie Crat, I think the reason, I gotta remind myself, the reason I'm a Green is because it's independent, not just because it's socialist. That really helped. But if a bunch of Bernie Crats and it becomes a more democratic socialist in character, but still independent, which is sort of where the Greens kind of started, even though it was half Trotskyist.
Sure.
So, but that, I guess that goes to show it's going to be more Marxist types that are going to want a independent left party. Everyone, anyone else is just a lib.
Yeah.
Even if they're socialist, like a Professor Wolf. Okay, so speaking on electoral theory and the socialist strategy, we're listening to Critique of the Gotha program.
We are. This is part 2 of that.
Getting into the actual
20
reading.
minutes into it, so yeah. Let's continue on.
As such, ceases to exist. We would therefore suggest, for the purpose of freedom, but of keeping down its enemies, and as soon as there can be any question of freedom, the state as such ceases to exist. We would therefore suggest that Gemeinwesen, commonality, be universally substituted for state. It is a good old German word that can very well do service for the French commune. Quote, the elimination of all social and political inequality, rather than, quote, the abolition of all class distinctions, is similarly a most dubious expression. As between one country, one province, and even one place and another, living conditions will always evince a certain inequality which may be reduced to a minimum but never wholly eliminated. The living conditions
That's
of
where
alpine dwellers will always...
That is where socialist rhetoric goes into the utopian territory, where it's like, well, that can never be the case. Just to clarify what that line was, the last sentence was talking about. Mm-hmm. So there's we want to eliminate all economic and social distinctions. Like we want everyone to be equal.
No special classes above anybody else. Yes.
Right. That's sort of, well, not classes, but like, so just, yeah, I guess maybe we need to listen to that again.
Okay. Yeah. Back up just a little bit here.
Just a minute.
German word that can very well do service for the French commune. Quote, the elimination of all social and political inequality, rather than, quote, the abolition of all class distinctions, is similarly a most dubious expression.
So the difference,
as between
that,
one country, one province, and even one place and another, living conditions will always evince...
Pause, thank
Yeah,
you.
so, yeah, right, so I was correct. So there's the line of eliminating all inequalities, as certain anarchists will talk about, and eliminating class distinctions. Mm-hmm. So, like, when we're doing queerness and racial elimination and, destroying whiteness, we're talking about eliminating class distinctions. Full equality, or getting rid of all inequalities, is not practical as a political project or a goal, because not saying that some areas will be always richer than others because of, I guess, the mining operations that could happen there. Just talking about extractive industry. Yeah. But let's say all the artists move to one part of town. Let's just talk about within a city.
Sure.
You'll have a neighborhood that has the art scene, and thus will have more culture than another part of the city.
Right.
Would we want all neighborhoods to be equal in their level of culture,
Right.
where we have to then assign a certain number of artists? Or I suppose we could assign a certain budget for arts, and thus you have artists doing things, murals, public projects, and stuff like that. But as far as the creation of all kinds of art, like there's a reason why the film industry thrived in Hollywood, because you could shoot things outside easily. There's no weather to worry about. Year round.
Very little rain. Yep.
So, we're not going to equalize things by having a film industry in every state.
Right.
Though, as much as certain tax policies will try to encourage that,
Yeah.
by creating enough tax incentives so that there is a film industry in New York, and there is a film industry in the Carolinas, and there is a film industry in Georgia, and Toronto.
Sure.
So many any movie that is set in New York is actually being filmed usually in Toronto. And that's tax incentives. That's not based on any material. It's trying to gain the market, rather than working with it.
Isn't it also just that New York is so crowded with stuff being shot already that it's hard to find a quiet street to go to?
Perhaps it needs to be clarified. When shooting occurs on a street, they block off the block.
Yeah, so like New Yorkers are like, I'm trying to get to my diner or whatever.
Well, that's just the chaos of Manhattan living, that you'll come up on an intersection and you'll have to detour, and your plans will have to change, and you have to be only people driving around have to be set in their ways. And when you're on foot, you have to be nimble and fluid and adaptable. And that's obviously, but that's sort of why maybe everybody's always cranky. They're always having to adapt and not have a set plan.
But getting back to it, yes, class distinction is what we're looking to get rid of.
Right, not all inequality.
Complete equality. And you can even look at rural versus urban. There's not going to be a symphony orchestra for every small town in the country. Yeah, it's going to be located in the urban center. So there'll be
like David Harvey is breaking this down as contradictions of capitalism that I've pseudo read, was that the inequality, unequal development is not really something you can fix with socialism. Like you kind of, in the Soviet Union, there was a similar dynamic where the cities were better off than the rural areas. It's just that all the cities, if you lived in a city, you were equally better off. So there was an equality between urban dwellers, but not between urban and rural, because it was just so gosh darn expensive to make rural areas as developed or as posh or internet connected as urban areas. Yeah. And that's sort of the advantage of urbanism, is that it is more efficient. So you kind of want that, I guess, more farming in cities or around cities, and so there isn't so much a long distance, but but it's something that is independent of capitalism. That unequal development is something that is sort of with us, and how we manage that is an open question, and not something that a socialist proposes to really fix. And if they do, they're being idealist. And you got Nick did kind of a video explaining this too.
All right, moving on. Come on.
Buffer time.
I don't know what's the problem.
Maybe skip ahead a minute. Maybe move it back again, since we were waiting for it to pause.
Is similarly a most dubious expression. As between one country, one province, and even one place and another, living conditions will always evince a certain inequality which may be reduced to a minimum but never wholly eliminated. The living conditions of alpine dwellers will always be different from those of the plainsmen. The concept of a socialist society as a realm of equality is a one-sided French concept deriving from the old liberty, equality, fraternity, a concept which was justified in that, in its own time and place, it signified a phase of development, but which, like all the one-sided ideas of earlier socialist schools, ought now to be superseded, since they produced nothing but mental confusion, and more accurate ways of presenting the matter have been discovered. I shall desist, although almost every word in this program, a program which is, moreover, insipidly written, lays itself open to criticism. It is such that, should it be adopted, Marx and I could never recognize a new party set up on that basis, and shall have to consider most seriously what attitude, public as well as private, we should adopt towards it. Footnote: on October 12, 1875, Engels wrote concerning this program that since both workers and their political opponents, quote, interpreted it communistically, quote, it is this circumstance alone which has made it possible for Marx and myself not to disassociate ourselves publicly from a program such as this. So long as our opponents, as well as the workers, continue to read our views into that program, we are justified in saying nothing about it, unquote. Continuing. Remember that abroad we are held responsible.
I feel the same way about various things. Like, for example, that, the Green Party national platform does not have the word socialist in it.
Yeah.
It does. We did change in 2016 to put the word post-capitalist in it, from which you can read
that gestures
communism.
Sure.
Yeah, it gestures towards socialism. So, you can read socialist policy into it. And so in the same way, Marx and Engels were like, well, since enough people, right, and it is language and meaning is derived through social action. If enough people are thinking, yeah, this is a socialist platform because I'm choosing to interpret it that way, when equality means an equality of outcome, or at least a standard outcome, and not full equality of like everything, then fine. I don't have to oppose it. And that's sensible. That's sensible. It's not dogmatic, and that's the sort of thing where when you really read Marx, it's like, yeah, it's not as dogmatic as it's made out to be because you had later Marxists being dogmatic about it, particularly Stalinists.
Yeah.
But that's because, like, it's not like they really wanted to believe things so sternly. It's that their position in society was untenable if they didn't. It was a necessity of the society. Yeah. Stalin wrote his pamphlet on socialist economics, and so you did not disagree with that.
Not if you wanted to keep your head, yes.
No. Or just be censored, or you won't be promoted. You won't be able to do anything.
No, I was just joking.
Yeah. Well, I'm reading Run Plenty, so that's sort of a dissection of. It's a what if, positively, like what if the Soviet Union did establish or develop cybersyn, cyber socialism.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Where computers do the economic planning, and it's using a bunch of vignettes to tell the story over the course of 15 years. But many of the characters have a part to play where they are like also in the political hierarchy, and how if you're not deemed important, foremans ignore you, but then if you make the right phone call with the right code word flower, it gets passed around, and in 2 days the plant owner gets a call, and suddenly you get all the right vacuum tubes that you want. I was reading the part where it's a computer engineer and he's doing the simulations for potato distribution, where it's like, what's the minimum amount of distance average distance that a potato needs to travel between a producer and a consumer, with a list of producers and a list of consumers. Sure. Right now it starts at like 70 kilometers, and then like based on a computer simulation, proper distribution using shadow prices, it's fictional. It's getting it down to like 55. It's like, oh man, that's so much better. I can go to the higher ups and say 30%, fresher potatoes.
That's funny. But yeah, that sounds really interesting, though. I'll have to check out. What'd you say the series was called?
It's a book called Red Plenty.
Red Plenty.
It won quite a lot of accolades.
Cool.
Obviously it's not on my shelf now. It's at work.
I'll see if I can find a link.
I'm only a third of the way in. I'm taking my time with it, I guess.
Cool. Very cool. All right, let's continue on. Boy, it's got a buffer. I don't know why it's taking so long to kick in.
Any and every statement and action of the German Social Democratic Workers' Party, e.g. by Bakunin in his work Statehood and Anarchy, in which we are made to answer for every injudicious word spoken or written by Liebknecht since the inception of the Demokratisches Wochenblatt. People imagine that we run the whole show from here, whereas you know as well as I do that we have hardly ever interfered in the least with internal party affairs, and then only in an attempt to make good, as far as possible, what we considered to have been blunders, and only theoretical blunders at that. But as you yourself will realize, this program marks a turning point, which may very well force us to renounce any kind of responsibility in regard to the party that adopts it. Generally speaking, less importance attaches to the official program of a party than to what it does. But a new program is, after all, a banner planted in public, and the outside world judges the party by it. Hence, whatever happens, there should be no going back, as there
Not
is here
usually, though.
on the Eisenach program. It should further be considered what the workers of other countries will think.
Did you want to expand on that, or just?
Well, only that, like, as far as the major parties go, it seems their banner changes every cycle.
Yeah.
They're mercurial. You know, I mean, there's these basic values that adherents or supporters think they're holding, but you gotta ask, are they really?
Yeah.
Like, what do your candidates or your office holders really have in common, except whether they're just more conservative or liberal, in tone, or how they're managing things, or
Mm-hmm.
there's no what is the Democratic Party platform? We care about workers. We care about it's meaningless, and it's not really what people are judging by. They're not making their decisions based on that. They're making statements based on what Kamala Harris is saying this week.
Mm-hmm.
What are the potential VP picks for Kamala saying? Secular, Kyle did a video about the governor of Minnesota listing his accomplishments, which is a sort of social democrat, wish list. But I'm sure of each of those things that there are poison pills or they're really half measures when you make a list like that. Because I've seen Dems in my state make lists like that, and I know because I've read the details in the paper that actually when they say that they've added this housing stock, or when they when Biden says he lowered student debt burdens, we know how little it was,
right?
So to say
it adds up to a big number, so they can flash that. So
yeah, they're saying I support clean water. Well, how much water did you clean? A few gallons, in the grand scheme of things.
Right.
It's a boilerplate, and I hope people would want more than that, but they'll say take what you can get, better than someone who denies that clean water is even a priority.
Mm-hmm.
But it's look, functionally, we judge parties by what they do, not just what they say.
Right, not just what they say.
That's what Marx. Are we still listening to Engel's preface, I think?
I think we were out of the preface at this point.
It's Marx's intro.
It's harder to tell with audiobooks, but yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're right. Walls has been pretty mixed bag. He especially under COVID, he started out with very strong policies. He understood the science of it, but then he got pushed back, and so he was he loosened everything up right away. So he'll do a good thing, but then he'll just kind of back off it.
Mm.
So, yeah. Anyway, back to the Gotha program.
Now you have states where they're basically banning mask wearing.
Yeah, right.
Because now it's a security. Now it's back to, well, a mask
yeah.
means you're covering your face
got something
and
to
you can't
hide,
be
yeah.
identified by scanners.
Right. Yep.
Think of this program. What impression will be created by this genuflection on the part of the entire German socialist proletariat before Lassalleanism? I am, moreover, convinced that a union on this basis would not last a year. Are the best minds of our party to descend to repeating, parrot fashion, Lassallean maxims concerning the iron law of wages and state aid? I'd like to see you, for one, thus employed. And were they to do so, their audiences would hiss them off the stage. And I feel sure that it is precisely on these bits of the program that the Lassalleans are insisting. The split will come, but we shall have, quote, made honest men again of Hasselmann, Hassenclever, and Tolka and Company. We shall emerge from the split weaker and the Lassalleans stronger. Our party will have lost its political virginity and will never again be able to come out wholeheartedly against the Lassallean maxims, which for a time it inscribed on its own banner. And then, should the Lassalleans again declare themselves to be the sole and most genuine workers' party, and our people to be bourgeois, the program would be there to prove it. All the socialist measures in it are theirs, and our party has introduced nothing save the demands of that petty bourgeois democracy, which it has itself described in that same program as part of the, quote, reactionary mass. I had held this letter back in view of the fact that you would only be released on April 1st, in honor of Bismarck's birthday, not wanting to expose it to the risk of interception in the course of an attempt to smuggle it in. Footnote there, in March 1872, August Bebel and Wilhelm Liebknecht were sentenced to 2 years confinement in a fortress for their adhesion to the International Working Men's Association and their socialist views. In April, Bebel was sentenced, in addition, to 9 months' imprisonment and deprived of his mandate as a Reichstag member for, quote, insulting His Majesty. Liebknecht was released on April 15, 1874, while Bebel was freed on April 1st, 1875. Back to the text. Well, I have just had a letter from Braca, who has also felt grave doubts about the program and asks for our opinion. I shall therefore send this letter to him for forwarding, so that he can read it without my having to write the whole thing over again. I have, by the way, also spoken my mind to Ram. To Liebknecht I wrote but briefly. I cannot forgive his not having told us a single word about the whole business, whereas Ram and others believed he had given us exact information, until it was, in a manner of speaking, too late. True, this has always been his wont, hence the large amount of disagreeable correspondence which we, both Marx and myself, have had with him, but this time it really is too bad, and we definitely shan't act in concert with him. Do see that you manage to come here in the summer. You would, of course, stay with me, and if the weather is fine, we might spend a day or two taking sea baths, which would really do you good after your long spell in jail. Ever your friend, F.E. P.S. Marx has just moved house. He's living at 41 Maitland Park Crescent, northwest London. And that's the end of that correspondence. Now
When you
we're
live
moving
there,
on to part one.
if you're ever going to bathe in clean water, you got to go to the ocean.
Gotta go to the ocean. Do you wonder?
Believe it or not, did I mention this? I'm playing Assassin's Creed Syndicate, and I did the Marx missions.
The Marx missions. That sounds like a lot of fun.
As
inaccurate as they may portray it.
Sure. It's. I think it's okay. I think it's
At
okay.
least it shows up in a video game. That's kind of
Exactly. At least they put him in there. They didn't have to do that.
No,
They had Darwin missions, Dickens missions. So putting Marx in for like the political side was I think a good choice.
That's something. I was just taking a look at Governor Wall's own website here. So this is like a perfect example. So he says, "Oh, police reform and public safety, fighting to ensure all Minnesotans feel safe," and all this stuff. But you go down a couple paragraphs, and he proposed $300 million to help local governments fund law enforcement and first responders and public safety. And like, his big thing was he banned chokeholds and warrior-style training and limited no-knock warrants. So, big progress out of him. But, like,
That's what passes for progressive, I guess.
Apparently so.
And progressives they're like, well, what else can we do? We don't have our own. We're not a force. We're too weak. Always too weak.
Mhm.
Yeah, but what makes them kind of weak is that they will not work with any other kind of leftist.
Yeah.
Because any other kind of leftist will say, well, that's not good enough. We need to push for
Right.
like a maximalist program.
Right.
How
How about some prison reform? How about
what comes like,
police
but of
reform?
course I'll get pushback from friends. Like, no, they don't want to go as far as like abolition or anything like that. So like, yeah, it doesn't help to always go for the maximum when you're talking to,
Sure.
potential joiners or just, other people. Just keep it to like what you share, like what you're both angry about,
Yeah. The values that underlie it. Yeah. Good strategy. All right. I suppose we can continue on then.
1 of Marx's critique.
Yeah, this is
So
still
concerning the first line, labor is the source of wealth and all culture, and since useful labor is possible only in society and through society, the proceeds of labor belong undiminished with equal right to all members of society. Marx's criticism. First part of the paragraph. Labor is the source of all wealth and all culture. Labor is not the source of all wealth. Nature is just as much the source of use values, and it is surely of such that material wealth consists, as labor, which itself is only the manifestation of a force of nature, human labor power. The above phrase is to be found in all children's primers and is correct insofar as it is implied that labor is performed with the appurtenant subjects and instruments. But a socialist program cannot allow such bourgeois phrases to pass over in silence the conditions that alone give them meaning. And insofar as people from the beginning behaved toward nature, the primary source of all instruments and subjects of labor, as an owner, treats it as belonging to us, then our labor becomes the source of use values, therefore also of wealth. The bourgeois have very good grounds for falsely ascribing supernatural creative power to labor, since precisely from the fact that labor depends on nature, it follows that the person who possesses no other property than their labor power must, in all conditions of society and culture, be the slave of other people who have made themselves the owners of the material conditions of labor. They can only work with their permission, hence live only with their permission. Let us now leave the sentence as it stands, or rather limps. What could one have expected in conclusion?
So yeah, like that magical quality of labor, like when a libertarian talks about mixing their labor in with the land, and that's what makes the land their property. That's what came to mind for me.
Yeah.
As well as that this is not so far off from social ecology.
Yeah.
It's like land, nature is what's first. And if you just treat labor as being the prime driver, then you sort of end up treating nature as property, and property relations is sort of what comes before labor, or labor relations is treated as property relations, and that's the big problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those are where contradictions creep in.
Yeah, that's cool to see, actually, that being developed at this stage. Very cool.
Conclusion. Obviously this, quote, since labor is the source of all wealth, no one in society can appropriate wealth except as the product of labor. Therefore, if one oneself does not work, one lives by the labor of others, and also acquires one's culture at the expense of the labor of others, unquote. Instead of this, by means of the verbal river.
I think that's good too, talking about how if you are not someone who labors, then by this conception,
what right do you to any
right.
social product?
Right. What right do you have to another man's labor to survive? That's the right wing.
You kind of see this played out in the when conservatives argue about. So J.D. Vance a year or so ago did put out that normal technocratic policy jargon of we should tax good, tax bad things we think are bad, and give tax breaks to things that we think are good.
Yeah.
Now we already give tax breaks to children having children, but it's the government and Republicans that actually took that away, as well as as well as the moderate, the blue dogs.
Yeah.
So we already actually were giving tax breaks to people with children, but saying that upset a lot of the fiscal conservatives that are like, why should my tax dollars go to fund people who have kids? They should, if people want to have big families, they should be able to afford them. Children are something you earn, right? And that's a fine, I guess, conservative value to have until you start freaking out about how few people are having children because of economic conditions.
Certain people are having children, as it always ends up being put.
The deserving people, which will be the people who are best employed, which will then be white, middle,
right,
somewhat educated, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So, but yeah, we don't have to dig into that. But just going from like a general tone, like, because sometimes I'll see videos about like the population crisis in Japan or Korea, kind of interviewing people our age or a little younger, and where, one couple was like, who actually had a kid. It's like, yeah, I actually switched to part-time because the fees for childcare go up if our income is over 60 grand. So I quit my job so we could have cheaper, affordable healthcare, childcare. And that actually helped us out. And now I'm thinking about maybe going part-time. Another woman who was sort of concerned, but also like, but I'm going to put my happiness first because I don't work for the nation. I don't really have any loyalty to the nation. People should follow their own happiness. Very base take. She was the only one who kind of put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone else kind of had like maybe that latent attitude of like, well, people should just do what is they need to do or should want to do. And if that's not have kids, but obviously, they're pointing out that's like, it's so unaffordable, everything's unaffordable, and that, they're barely able to make ends meet themselves, let alone raise kids, knowing how much it costs, and so on and so forth. But the one woman who was like, just pretty well spoken about it. It's just like she put it in terms of like, I'm not in the anti-patriotic terms of like, what does it matter if there's like, because on a national level, population crisis, but on the global level, it's still increasing, and it will plateau in 70 years, which is something to actually look forward to.
Yeah.
But the fear is that half the world population will be African.
Yeah.
But if a chunk of those Africans are all watching anime, and enough of them are able to move to Japan, since it will be an empty country. Like half of a culture is from the landscape, the geography.
Absolutely.
A mountainous island. And what existed there. And they're gonna mix it with where they came from.
Uh-huh.
So what?
Yeah, it's how culture.
It'll be a neo-Japanese culture,
Right.
just as I'm a neo-Ashkenazi. I mean, the Ashkenazi Jewish culture that I have is a shadow. It's a pale comparison to what it used to be, but it doesn't matter because the conditions of Jews are different.
There will always be new cultures arising and blending, and there's no static culture. It's not a thing.
Who mourns for the Occident?
For the what?
I'm trying to pronounce like the Southern French, like Occitan. It's not that. That's not what it's called. But let's see.
I don't know the quote, so I can't help you out.
Fine. Who mourns for the Celts? I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah.
We got some Celts left in the world, but
sure. Yeah, I have Celtic.
How about Spanish
ancestry.
Celts?
Sure.
What about the Spanish Celts? Who mourns for them?
All right. Stuff changes.
Well,
it's fine.
We have the names of things.
Mm-hmm.
Portugal,
Right.
That's their legacy.
All right. Let's move on.
I know I went on a tangent there.
No, that's fine. I'm frustrated with this player tonight. I don't know what's happening. I have good internet connection.
So this is a good reading though, because Marx really does go line by
And
line with
since
like what
a
his
propos-
problems are with each one, and it is really just kind of like he's shit post reacting to this document. And it's like, look, you know, if the party's good and the workers support it, then fine, you know, I don't have to quibble about it.
Yeah.
I'm quibbling about it now, privately in a letter, since my friends are asking me about it.
Position is added.
And I have to worry about when I'm sending the letter because I could be locked up for it.
Uh-huh. Yeah, very true.
Like he didn't want to send it around Bismarck's birthday because I guess the mail was probably going to be more monitored because maybe they're thinking that these guys are plotting this assassination.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe they should have opened the cook's mail. But for all we know, the FBI is actually monitoring all kinds of mail and still ignoring any kind of actual threats because they're incompetent.
To the
just
agent
like,
that's...
well, I'll let it go ahead. I'll let it go. Let's let this play out. You know, let's let it cook. I don't want to move too early because I could be punished if I'm to you know, pull the trigger.
Sure. Yep.
Which I guess we're fine with. I mean, we kind of want them to think twice.
Well, to whatever agent is monitoring this stream, I hope you're at least gaining some knowledge out of it.
Entertained.
In order to draw a conclusion from this and not from the first one. Second part of the paragraph, quote, useful labor is possible only in society and through society, unquote. According to the first proposition, labor was the source of all wealth and all culture. Therefore, no society is possible without labor. Now we learn, conversely, that no, quote, useful labor is possible without society. One could just as well have said that only in society
like a
can
tautology.
useless and even socially harmful labor become a branch of gainful occupation, that only in society can one live by being idle, etc., etc. In short, one could just as well have copied the whole of Rousseau. And what is useful labor? Surely only labor which produces the intended useful result. A savage, and people were savages after we had ceased to be apes, who kills an animal with a stone, who collects fruit, etc., performs, quote, useful labor. Thirdly, the conclusion, quote, useful labor is possible only in society and through society. The proceeds of labor belong undiminished with equal right to all members of society, unquote. A fine conclusion. If useful labor is possible only in society and through society, the proceeds of labor belong to society, and only so much therefrom accrues to the individual worker as is not required to maintain the, quote, condition of labor, society. In fact, this proposition has at all times been made use of by the champions of the state of society prevailing at any given time. First comes the claims of the government and everything that sticks to it, since it is the social organ for the maintenance of the social order. Then comes the claims of the various kinds of private property, for the various kinds of private property are the foundations of society, etc. One sees that such hollow phrases are the foundations of society, etc. One sees that such hollow phrases can be twisted and turned as desired. The first and second parts of the paragraph have some intelligible connection only in the following wording, quote, labor becomes the source of wealth and culture only as social labor, unquote, or what is the same thing, quote, in and through society, unquote. This proposition is incontestably correct, for although isolated labor, its material conditions presupposed, can create use value, it can create neither wealth nor culture. But equally incontestable is this other proposition, quote, in proportion as labor develops socially and becomes thereby a source of wealth and culture, poverty and destitution develop among the workers, and wealth and culture among the non-workers, unquote. This is the law of all history hitherto. What therefore had to be done here, instead of setting down general phrases about labor and society, was to prove concretely how, in present capitalist society, the material, etc. conditions have at last been created which enable and compel the workers to lift the social curse. In fact, however, the whole paragraph, bungled in style and content, is only there in order to inscribe the Lassallean catchword of the, quote, undiminished proceeds of labor, as a slogan at the top of the party banner. I shall return later to the, quote, proceeds of labor, equal right, etc., since the same thing recurs in a somewhat different form further on. Sentence 2, quote, In present-day society, the instruments of labor are the monopoly of the capitalist class. The resulting dependence of the working class is the cause of misery and servitude in all forms." Unquote. This sentence, borrowed from the rules of the International, is incorrect in this, quote, improved edition. In present-day society, the instruments of labor are the monopoly of the landowners. The monopoly of property in land is even the basis of the monopoly of capital and the capitalists. In the passage in question, the rules of the International do not mention either one or the other class of monopolists. They speak of the, quote, monopolizer of the means of labor, that is, the sources of life, unquote. The addition, sources of life, makes it sufficiently clear that land is included.
So I just want to clarify for myself. Let's see. So the capitalist power doesn't, that, you know, as we put it in socialist circles and cliques, that it does start with private property,
Right.
rather than monopoly on property that capitalists have. That's what we're referring to when we say private property. Not just the dynamic of owning or having access to property. I think that always flips a positive switch with
That's
people
true.
when I say access to property,
Absolutely.
not just private property.
Right, because if it was
Property
freely
rights.
available to everyone, then everyone would be a capital owner. Right.
When I'm and that's when I'm talking. That's when I'm talking to people who do not want to own property. Right? They don't want to be. They don't want that commitment. They want, like, for them, freedom. It's an odd thing because, you know, there's a definition of freedom I like is, like, you know, you can only have as much freedom as much as responsibility you're willing to take on.
Sure, I like that.
And so, like, to have the freedom that one gains from property ownership, you have to be responsible for property, even if it's a bit of it in a co-op. But you have a lot of people, leftists, who maybe are artists first, or like they have passions they want to follow that aren't revolutionary, you know, and they're not going to be building the revolution, but they can be supportive of it and play a part in it. And it's currently talking about my bandmate, actually, conversation we were having, as we do, especially once we start playing labor songs. And when I switched to the word access to property, he's like, "Oh yeah, I'm fine with that. It's like equal access to property, not just ownership of property." And that's where we get into, like, the statism of it. That people are cool with statism. That, like, all the property can be owned by public trusts, and everyone simply has access to this property, provided that there is an administration that manages the property. Instead of distributing it to 1,000 different flowers and let them bloom. Because in the individualist mind, and we are in an individualist culture, and that goes for us too, I think we don't. I get anxiety about that duality myself, of trying to follow projects and being a project leader or doer of projects, but I also just want to hang back and be supportive of things. And I think everyone has that sort of those two wolves. And it needs to be taken off of people's plate, because the freedom people want is the freedom to not have to worry about such things.
Yeah, kind of.
But it kind of means they want to skip to that step where economy and politics has withered away. And that's sort of why apoliticism has expanded so much, because in the postmodern world or culture, it's like we actually, like, in people's lives and as a consumer, that whole, like, the withering away of politics, and it just all becomes the administration of things by PMC or bureaucrats, which can really enjoy their jobs, or they just do it as a job, which I meet both kinds pretty often. Like, there's both kinds in a bureaucracy as a civil service worker myself. Like, again, I'm of the type where it's like, it's just a job for me and I want it to stay that way. Why? Because I want to be free to pursue projects on a passion basis and not for pay. Like, I want to live decoupled from the dollar. my passions, my projects, my revolution building. But that limits, like, the 8 hours a day I go to work. I'm not really doing anything important or useful. I mean, I kind of am. I that's what makes me picky about what units I join or I apply to. But my current station, I don't feel like I'm contributing very much. Even though they enjoy me being there, and it's sweet, and I get to read a lot. But I'm starting to. It's the commute, you know. It's not a long commute, but I'm biking down and up a hill. It's such a short ride, but it's it's uphill, and I'm tired of it. It's the only negative, I think. Otherwise, maybe I would keep doing this indefinitely, but I don't know. I'm really, I'm sorry to make you my therapist, but
No, not at all.
if I didn't have a therapist that I'd bother about this and talk about it. But it's like, it's normal life, you know. It's not something I need to. But to bring it back to the bureaucracy, and just like, yeah, we kind of do want that. It is more efficient to do things in that corporate structure. We just don't want that corporate structure to almost control all land, but it needs to be controlling and managing for the sake of use value and not exchange value.
Yeah.
Like, that's the thing we really want to switch.
Right.
We don't. There's sort of like, in order for things to be use value driven, they have to be small and co-ops, and they have to be, you know, unions. But I'm not seeing that occur. In the 20th century, you had all of these things in places, and it didn't change the relationship at all. But doing it from the top down, where we switch like use value from exchange value on like a state level, and all the state assets. Well, I mean, that's the sort of thing. State assets are managed for their use value. That's why they're a good example of socialism, is when the government does more.
Sure.
So, like, I'm okay leaning into that if it means what people maybe think it means, that government ownership means use value driven.
Right.
Because that's breaking one of those fundamental contradictions of capitalism. Maybe not the hierarchical ones. But I'm okay with taking things one step at a time, and I think that's the important. Because when me and Peter, when we're talking about eco-socialism, what that means, we're really talking about the switch to use value. And that means, and that's what allows degrowth to matter and still mean improving people's lives.
Exactly, yeah. It's
Yeah.
not pegged to any sort of financial instrument or thing that needs to perform in a certain way. It's, you know, here's our resources. How do we make best use of them?
Next reading, by the way, can be an article that my friend Peter wrote. It's a response to Matt Huber, who is kind of opposing degrowth, but in a non-robust way. So they kind of respond to him, because he's a socialist too, and he's like, class war as climate change is his book.
Oh, okay.
So there's sort of a schism or disagreement within socialists about degrowth.
Yes.
And eco-socialists are moving towards the degrowth theory, because it explains, has explanatory power in how we actually have a sustainable future while doing socialism. Or that one needs the other. Like, you cannot have a good worker movement that is sustainable unless it's degrowth. And you can't do degrowth unless it's a working class movement, particularly one that is internationalist, because what a lot of socialists will do that aren't degrowth and aren't like, they're nationalists and focused. They completely ignore eco-imperialism. The global division of labor, which is just a fact.
Yes.
The lithium mining, just the electric, just changing, decoupling, the decarbonizing, and just electrifying everything. Like, that still depends on an enormous amount of third world labor.
Right.
And
unregulated, very dangerous labor at that.
Right.
Yep. All right. Let's move on.
included in the instruments of labor. The correction was introduced because Lassalle, for reasons now generally known, attacked only the capitalist class and not the landowners. In England, the capitalist class is usually not even the owner of the land on which his factory stands. Sentence 3, quote, "The emancipation of labor demands the promotion of the instruments of labor to the common property of society and the cooperative regulation of the total labor with a fair distribution of the proceeds of labor." Unquote. Quote, "Promotion of the instruments of labor to the common property," unquote, ought obviously to read their, quote, "conversion into the common property," unquote, but this is only passing. What are the proceeds of labor? The product of labor or its value? And in the latter case, is it the total value of the product, or only that part of the value which labor has newly added to the value of the means of production consumed? Comment, remember that raw materials are included in the means of production. Proceeds of labor is a loose notion which Lassalle has put in the place of definite economic conceptions. What is a, quote, fair distribution? Do not the bourgeois assert that the present-day distribution is, quote, fair? And is it not, in fact, the only fair distribution on the basis of the present-day mode of production? Are economic relations regulated by legal conceptions, or do not, on the contrary, legal relations arise out of economic ones? Have not also the socialist sectarians the most varied notions about, quote, fair distribution? To understand what is implied in this connection by the phrase fair distribution, we must take the first paragraph and this one together. The latter presupposes a society wherein the instruments of labor are common property, and the total labor is cooperatively regulated. And from the first paragraph we learn that, quote, "the proceeds of labor belong undiminished with equal right to all members of society," unquote. To all members of society, to those who do not work as well? What remains then of the, quote, undiminished proceeds of labor? Only to those members of society who work? What remains then of the, quote, equal right of all members of society? But, quote, all members of society and, quote, equal right are obviously mere phrases. The kernel consists in this, that in this communist society every worker must receive the, quote, undiminished Lassallean, quote, proceeds of labor. Let us take, first of all, the words proceeds of labor in the sense of the product of labor. Then the cooperative proceeds of labor are the total social product. From this must now be deducted, first, cover for replacement of the means of production used up. Second, additional portion for expansion of production. Third, reserve or insurance funds to provide against accidents, dislocations caused by natural calamities, etc. These deductions from the, quote, undiminished proceeds of labor are an economic necessity, and their magnitude is to be determined according to available means and forces, and partly by computation of probabilities, but they're in no way calculable by equity. There remains the other part of the total product.
So just to relate like this breakdown and critique to something more contemporary, those memes where like the pizza parlor or pizza business, like they split the profits from the day amongst the workers and everybody got like $300 or something.
Right.
Like, why isn't it like that all the time?
Mhm.
I think if it was, I think there's a difference between, I think it was revenues, maybe like,
I think it was actually profit.
Was it
at least
profit?
the case that I saw, it listed it as profit. Now it could be that whoever was making the article just conflated profit and
With revenue.
That could be, but
So yeah, so what he's doing here is like Lassalle would like, you know, generalize with like this unmolested labor output, labor value, you know,
Sure.
like you make this much value for the company and it should be all yours.
should be all yours, right?
Except that's revenue maybe or value, but how much really is that value once you take all of the other expenses?
Right.
So there's that difference between net and profit, right? So like there's profit, but like some businesses, especially manufacturing, profit's actually really low, or profitability is really varied. And in certain times, especially because of markets, your profit will be actually really low.
Yeah.
That's why capital shifts around so often from not only sector to sector, but region to region, country to country. from manufacturing to finance to seek better profit margins. That's why, the Bitcoin and whatever. Just take your pick. Or why media producers, movie studios will produce movies, but then not release them for the sake of tax write-off because it was more profitable for them to just not release the movie.
Put it out, yeah.
But anyway, how does that relate to this? That, like, don't promise people the moon when really it's more like you should promise that equity, because just giving people exactly what they made in value and widgets isn't actually that equitable to all of society. Right. It's like saying, like, being pro-labor means making sure that a union pipe fitter gets 6-figure salary. And then you end up with a bunch of really entitled reactionary guys, because if there's less production, like less work for pipe fitters or more equity with development, it could cut into their salary.
Yeah.
And then they're voting for Trump.
Yeah. Or they get into trying to limit how many other pipe fitters can enter the market so they can maintain their share, stuff like that.
They're thinking with capitalist logic still, because it's you're appealing to people's desire to maximize their own personal profitability,
right?
Which is something that occurs across the board in our society, even among lefties of various stripes. And it comes across where it's like we debate about whether certain streamers or actors are petit bourgeois, and that line is so blurry, because what we really need to ask is, are they using capitalist logic or socialist logic when they're making their economic calculations? And I think as long as, like, they're not doing complete, but that's the thing, it's not just revenue sharing, right? It's like, so maybe I want to avoid just saying, like, unless there's full revenue sharing, they're not really socialist. But there's all those other expenses, like, the insurance, and that just goes for all types of social insurance. That includes guaranteed income or fire safety.
You got to work in contract work. Like, not all work is continuous. Like, especially with the streamer, they might employ a part-time person to cut videos for them, but they don't need to be on the payroll 100%.
I love the suggestion in the alternative about, like, a platform for gig work.
Yeah.
That follows a socialist logic instead of a capitalist one.
That would be amazing.
Yeah, because there are sectors of workers that need to do gig work because they have to have a. I went over this already.
Yeah. Moving on. Eventually moving on.
But sometimes it's aggravating that, like, we're still dealing with these, like, mistakes in rhetoric and thinking that
tended to serve as means of consumption.
Figured out a while ago,
right?
But since but we kind of had a society where, like, that thinking was supposedly dominant and taught to everyone, so everyone had the same heuristic floor. And maybe they kind of did, but that's considered evil to do that. We want people to be free thinkers, which means free to be completely mixed up and non-philosophical. Yeah. But that's kind of where equality and equity kind of comes from, having that equal higher education access. You can't, like, direct democracy and other kinds of projects aren't really feasible without that.
Sure.
Though it's not sort of guaranteed, but it's also an answer to, like, the caste versus class, that you have these social castes of the higher educated, and that's who the ruling class is, the professional managers, and that they're not workers and they're not a working class, but they're just in a different caste, but they're all in the same class, but they're in different castes because of education level. That does not make them ruling class. Just as being a banker doesn't. Well, as I think he mentioned, Marx, the difference between like a capitalist doesn't mean they're the land is not the same as the landowner. And if you just focus on capitalists, you kind of leave the landowners out of the equation, which is similar to if you just put the focus on Wall Street, you kind of forget about the land barons and the bourgeois of small cities where, you know, and the Trumps basically, or the Trump-like, the people, the Trumpites are the landowners. If you're going to say that the Democrats are the party of Wall Street and Republicans are the party of landowners, or people who profit and the profitability is based on the land monopoly,
just owns.
or the market economy of which the finance sector is extracting from. So they're oppressed by them, despite also following capitalist logic as much as like, and maybe sometimes it feels like they feel forced to, just as we all are, in a way. But because they're higher up in the ladder, you know, they have more to lose, so thus they're more militant in defending it, or willing to, you know, destroy democracy. You know.
Yeah.
Did you see that? Did you see that latest fear mongering? It's always so much fear mongering to take like Trump at his like word or to interpret him in certain ways. Like he was saying, is like, once you vote for me this time, you won't have to do it again next time. And that's implying we'll end the Constitution in elections.
But
I'm like,
it's a
I think it means that they won't survive till next cycle.
That could be it too, or also just it's his second term, so he won't be up for election.
Oh, there's that. There's the literal. There's the literal mindedness of it, which you should always start with.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole like, I think when you're talking about the anxious middle class or the precarious middle class, it's like they just don't want to have to worry about politics. So it's like they want to vote for someone who's going to fix everything, and then they don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
So that he's just channeling that. He's literally like, he's saying what I'm thinking. Right. That's why they love him. He says what they think, and what people think is, I just don't want to have to worry about it. And funny enough, that's also what liberals believe.
Right.
But they don't articulate that. They want to have the moral high ground that they do care all the time.
Right.
But they also get really upset that they have to care and defend basic rights against the fascists, which is something the Working Families Party, like their posters are like, we don't agree with Harris and Biden, but we don't want to have to spend 4 years fighting the right for our basic rights. Like, what are you doing now, motherfuckers?
Yeah, right?
Nothing.
Yeah.
Or winning the victory of some states have 5 weeks sick time, guaranteed sick time, but only for some workers. Because I know once you get to the fine print, it's not really forever. It's not gonna be across the board. There will be loopholes. There will be sectors that like get away with not supplying it, and certainly not to gig workers and other sectors as more and more the economy is just not full-time salary workers anymore.
Yeah.
I'm one of the few, you know. I get sick time and I'm accruing it because with mask wearing, I'm not getting as many colds. I just had my COVID last fall and I have not had to take sick time out since.
Yeah. I don't think I have either. Yep.
I only use it for medical appointments now.
Well, that is the ideal, yeah. All right, let's move on.
Before this is divided among the individuals, there has to be deducted again from it, first, the general costs of administration not belonging to production. This part will, from the outset, be very considerably restricted in comparison with present-day society, and it diminishes in proportion as the new society develops. Second, that which is intended
they're going to have
for
all
the common
those social
satisfaction of
costs,
needs,
you know?
such as schools, health services.
We're going to have all those more social costs, so the social surplus, the surplus of labor value is going to be eaten up until like private spending is actually going to be like not a lot. It's like, what? This is all I get? Yeah, but you also have all the social services.
You also have all the
and the basics
paid for. Yeah, right.
But that was Soviet Union, and people seem roughly satisfied with it, but wanted a little extra, and that's where, well, let's do some entrepreneurship. Let's the something in Red Plenty that came up was the fact that, and this is probably how it really worked, especially early on, is that you didn't really have any private restaurants. Eventually, if you were eating out, you were eating at your social club. Based on your profession, your job, or your sector, or maybe it was your factory had a social center, and there was a cafe or a restaurant there that you would eat at, if you were eating out. But if you weren't, like, the problem brought up in the chapter was that it was the party conference, and you had people from other countries, especially socialist countries, but other foreign press were there. And you had some Frenchmen who were just trying to find a place to eat, Now, if you were there as a foreigner, then through the tourist bureau, you would be provided meals. But that's very controlling. It gives you the air that everything is controlled in Soviet Russia, right? In the Soviets, and there's only one place to eat. It's like, why am I being controlled? I want to fend for myself. I want to see the city. But then you find that even when you see people getting served, you're not allowed in, because in this case it was the writers union, and it's the restaurant for writers. But the person was pretty generous, and it's like, and after asking them who they were, it's like, well, we're journalists with the foreign press. It's like, well, a journalist is a type of writer, so I'll go upstairs and come on in as a guest, and I'll sort it out upstairs, which he was able to do pretty easily, he says. But he also had to sign a petition against, like, the latest from the Free Europe Radio, which is always, which is a CIA propaganda.
Yeah. When they attach free to that,
Probably saying how, like, there's no free speech in Soviet Union. But the chapter it's from the point of view of a comedic playwright.
Okay.
And how, because of the post-Stalinist era, he's gotten more freedom, but it's also made him more aware of, like, certain constraints, I guess, because there are still constraints. Like, he can now write confused teenagers or something, right? They don't have to be these patriotic archetypes, but he still has to write a happy ending or something, or a resolution. It's like, why do I have to do that? So he's a little, like, upset, but he's, like, thinking back of the time, 15 years ago, and just like, I literally could have been locked up because I showed up to the wrong meeting.
A different kind of freedom, yeah, that's for sure. All right, let's continue.
Etc. From the outset, this part grows considerably in comparison with present-day society, and it grows in proportion as the new society develops. Third, funds for those unable to work, etc., in short, for what is included under so-called official poor relief today. Only now do we come to the, quote, distribution, which the program, under Lassallean influence, alone has in view in its narrow fashion, namely to that part of the means of consumption which is divided among the individual producers of the cooperative society. The undiminished proceeds of labor have already unnoticeably become converted into the diminished proceeds, although what the producer is deprived of in his capacity as a private individual benefits him directly or indirectly in his capacity as a member of society. Just as the phrase of the undiminished proceeds of labor has disappeared, so now does the phrase of the proceeds of labor disappear altogether. Within the cooperative society, based on common ownership of the means of production, the producers do not exchange their products. Just as little does the labor employed on the products appear here as the value of these products, as a material quality possessed by them, since now, in contrast to capitalist society, individual labor no longer exists in an indirect fashion, but directly as a component part of total labor.
Uh-oh.
The phrase
the individual
labor,
doesn't exist?
objectionable
What
also
is this, the
today on
Borg?
account of its ambiguity, thus loses all meaning.
And that's
What
the
we have
ultimate
to deal with
nightmare,
here
I
is
guess, of the American who's anti-socialist or anti-left. It's like their ultimate fear is that, because we talk in terms of like, yeah, the individual doesn't matter in the terms of labor, because I don't know, we just feel like it would be better if it isn't all like you're on your own and you just have to maximize your own profitability, and that's the same thing as maximizing your ability to do hobbies and passions, knit, and go out to shows,
Sure.
and for there to be shows there to go to, media to consumption in any way. In fact, I mean, again, the constraints of the developing socialist states that exist in the 20th century and even today is the fact that they're not as developed as us. It's like they didn't have plenty. They don't have our surplus in development. That's sort of why it's like it looked like they always had less than us, because they did. They were behind. They were catching up. Like the Soviet Union, even when they were supposedly our equal as a rival superpower, were still like a third. Like they still had half of the GDP that we did, and half them, and the size of their military was still half the size.
Yeah.
And
Still a long way.
and other things, and in other metrics, they were still halfway to us
Right.
in 1950 and to 60.
Sure.
It was just like the whole. The scary part was just that their economy was growing faster because they were catching up. But you could say the same thing about China and India and Japan. They grew really fast to catch up, and then they catch up, and then are equal, and then suffer the same social consequences, whatever they may be,
Very good point. Yes.
or the same postmodern malaise.
Uh-huh. All right. Continuing. Oh, no. Come on.
Communist society, not as it has developed on its own foundations, but on the contrary, just as it emerges from capitalist society, which is thus in every respect, economically, morally, and intellectually, still stamped with the birthmarks of the old society from whose womb it emerges. Accordingly, the individual producer receives back from society, after the deductions have been made, exactly what they give to it. What they have given to it is their individual quantum of labor. For example, the social working day consists of the sum of the individual hours of work. The individual labor time of the individual producer is the part of the social working day contributed by them, their share in it. They receive a certificate from society that they have furnished such and such an amount of labor, after deducting their labor for the common funds, and with this certificate they draw from the social stock of means of consumption as much as the same amount of labor cost. The same amount of labor which they have given to society in one form, they receive back in another. Here, obviously the same principle prevails as that which regulates the exchange of commodities, as far as this is the exchange of equal values. Content and form are changed because under the altered circumstances no one can give anything except their labor, and because, on the other hand, nothing can pass to the ownership of individuals except individual means of consumption. But as far as the distribution of the latter among the individual producers is concerned, the same principle prevails as in the exchange of commodity equivalents. A given amount of labor in one form is exchanged for an equal amount of labor in another form. Hence, equal right here is still in principle bourgeois right, although principle and practice are no longer at loggerheads, while the exchange of equivalents in commodity exchange exists only on the average and not in the individual case. In spite of this advance, this equal right is still constantly stigmatized by a bourgeois limitation. The right of the producers is proportional to the labor they supply. The equality consists in the fact that measurement is made with an equal standard, labor. But one person is superior to another physically or mentally, and supplies more labor in the same time, or can labor for a longer time, and labor, to serve as a measure, must be defined by its duration or intensity, otherwise it ceases to be a standard of measurement. This equal right is an unequal right for unequal labor. It recognizes no class differences because everyone is only a worker like everyone else, but it tacitly recognizes unequal individual endowment, and thus productive capacity, as a natural privilege. It is therefore a right of inequality in its content like every right. Right, by its very nature, can consist only in the application of an equal standard, but unequal individuals, and they would not be different individuals if they were not unequal, are measurable only by an equal standard insofar as they are brought under an equal point of view, are taken from one definite side only, for instance, in the present case, are regarded only as workers, and nothing more is seen in them, everything else being ignored. Further, one worker is married, another is not. One has more children than another, and so on and so forth. Thus, with an equal performance of labor, and hence an equal in the social consumption fund, one will in fact receive more than another, one will be richer than another, and so on. To avoid all these defects, right, instead of being equal, would have to be unequal. But these defects are inevitable in the first phase of communist society, as it is when it has just emerged after prolonged birth pangs from capitalist society. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby. In a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life but life's prime want, after the productive forces have also increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. I have dealt more at length with the undiminished proceeds of labor.
So like the LaSalle motto that he's critiquing is, the usually the unionist or like the labor motto of getting what you're due based on the work based on what you produce, and thus you're measuring by the standard. Just to kind of go over again, since it was kind of long-winded, but were you following all of that?
Yeah. Basically, just again,
delineating
equality from, I guess, equity, for lack of a better term.
Right.
So.
Like Paracom's contribution is distinguishing labor from like effort and sacrifice. That two people can put in the same effort and maybe have or the same sacrifice, and that's your standard for measurement, not how many hours you work. Because one person can do more in a few amount of time, especially if they're experienced, than another. But does it mean that they should not be paid the same amount? They worked 4 hours, but one did more. And so you always kind of have that resentment among coworkers of like, we're all doing the same job. Let's say it's setting up tables. But I set up 10 and you only did 2.
Yeah, right.
And that's a resentment there. And is it because the person who set up 2, I don't know, didn't get any sleep? Is it because they're disabled and has to move slower? Or is it because like, they have personal issues and they, will make excuses for themselves why, they're an asshole.
Right. Or is the 10-person table setter-upper just like rolling them out of the closet and like knows exactly what to do, and the legs all fall out and pop out, and he can just do things better because he's got the expertise and the experience.
So rather than so the thing here is, and the point of the motto is each according to their ability, each according to their need, is not to measure out labor and value based on the individual work, but just to say there's a job to do. This many people did it, but all of society is going to get the benefit from it.
Right.
And it's not going to be divvied up based on people's workload or job or what they do, but everyone's going to get the same amount, and that includes the same amount of non-basic consumption. The same Netflix subscription, the same movie pass,
right?
The same restaurant pass. The ability to just walk into your social club and order the veal, or something like that. It just should flash your membership card, if it's your club. But that's where it's like, well, obviously, since we don't have to divvy it up based on like, job or whatever, which is sort of how the which is also the sort of labor union kind of unionist type of thing, where it's like, well, until it's the state and it's all collective property, where everyone has a big social club with different restaurants with different types of food, and then you don't have to go to yours, you can go to any of them.
Sure.
Unless, until there's capacity, and then, but then it's about like, and then you get into economic planning. How many restaurants per capita can a locality need before there, what's the efficiency as far as capacity goes, the types of food, the kind of variety people want, and that's something that has to be factored in to the calculations, right?
And it's ironic that capitalists are always talking about how that's just an impossible thing to predict. Like we have no idea until we do it. Except for companies do this all the time. Red Lobster.
It's part of the corporate economy.
Right, exactly. Red Lobster only goes into a place that they know they have a population base to support Red Lobster, and they look at all the other restaurants that are there with similar fare. They make calculations before they move. So they're
linear actuation tables.
Absolutely.
Or whatever. And that the computer, does the same math that a grandma can do on their hands, but they're doing it a million times.
Sure.
Or something.
We'll have a larger data set too.
And those are the '60s computers, and then we have our computers now, which are just like magical in comparison. So and of course the United States, what was the book? Walmart being a planned economy, corporations are planned economies.
State of Walmart, whatever it was called.
Yeah,
like
people
that.
say Walmart, but of course, again, maybe that book didn't go into it with the Marxist lens, or maybe they did, but it's like we just need those institutions, but using use value, and not doing their planning based on wages paid out and things about, but how much production is going to be put out, and how much, not how much people are going to get, but how much can people get out. And Paracom kind of works that out with the computer planning process being participatory, with the producers and consumers putting in orders. To work out that calculation problem.
Absolutely.
Like the criteria you're putting into the modeling.
Right.
That's usually where it's like, what kind of modeling would you put in? Obviously, needs first, and then how much can be produced on top of that. Which is, we're pretty efficient, so we can produce a lot.
Yeah, absolutely.
In fact, too much. Too much to create all sorts of not to create the psychosis, but when people do have a psychosis, and then results in that overconsumption, hoarding, and other type of just complete insanity.
Indeed.
Or it's insane. It's a cultural insanity that results from, or waste that results from personal insanity. Because not that the overconsumption does not exist simply because people have trauma. But I've been slowly, not addicted, but watching these cleaning videos where it's like cleaning up a hoarder house.
Yeah.
And the guy will talk about the kinds of a little, armchair psychologist, but also just like, I've talked to them, I've talked to their family, I've talked, and you can also see the story.
Yeah.
You can see the story through the horde of they started as middle class. It's kind of nice. Things are still there and resellable, or they're not broken. But as you go up through the pile, things get cheaper and cheaper. You can see the story of things they had to keep buying through their psychosis, but they had less money to do it. But to maintain that illusion or that middle class, I have a lot, I have plenty, I have a good life.
Yeah, you wonder how much would go away if people were just provided for, and then also didn't identify so closely with their whatever they do for labor, I guess.
But also a good, I don't know if it's a good substitute, but you can substitute a lot of social workers for just more time. The ADHD haver with more time to manage themselves can manage themselves better, and they can't manage themselves if they're underwater.
Scrambling from one thing to another.
I like the cleaners. He had a good line about if someone's drowning, maybe you've heard this kind of metaphor of like, when someone's drowning, you just help them. You don't ask them why they got caught in the river, or you don't why you get mad at them for not knowing how to swim. It's like, look, if someone's drowning,
Yeah.
I'm not going to toss them a towel to dry off. That's his
That's pretty
his
good.
change to it. I like that. I like that
like that
little
analogy.
change up to it. Which is the equivalent of like helping someone but not in the way they need,
Yeah.
or helping them but not enough, or helping them in a way that isn't useful
Yeah.
because their underlying problem isn't solved, which is they need to get out of the river, and then you can hand them the towel to dry off. But seeing the problem of someone drowning and the problem you see is that they're wet, right? Which is the case of like
Access to
they're
water, yeah.
living in a pigsty. That's their issue. So we just have to get them out of there. Like, well, their issue is that they're traumatized, and I mean, yes, getting them out of there can help because then it's less stressful, and then they can maybe go to therapy. And that's definitely not going to happen until their house is clean,
Yeah.
which is why he does what he does. So it's like, I have no bones that if nothing else changed, the house would be in the same state again in 3 months.
Mhm.
In this case, he was talking about someone who was hoarding food. It was like
Oh.
food, which means you get like piles of food that are just rotten, and that's where you get the bad, terrible smells and liquefied bread in bags and.
Oh man.
Anyway, yeah. let's
Yeah. Yep.
Continue.
Continuing.
on the one hand, and with equal right and fair distribution on the other, in order to show what a crime it is to attempt, on the one hand, to force on our party again, as dogmas, ideas which in a certain period had some meaning, but have now become obsolete verbal rubbish, while again perverting, on the other, the realistic outlook, which it cost so much effort to instill into the party, but which has now taken root in it, by means of ideological nonsense about right and other trash so common among the Democrats and French socialists. Quite apart from the analysis so far given, it was in general a mistake to fuss about so-called distribution and to put the principal stress on it. Any distribution whatever of the means of consumption is only a consequence of the distribution of the conditions of production themselves. The latter distribution, however, is a feature of the mode of production itself. The capitalist mode of production, for example, rests on the fact that the material conditions of production are in the hands of non-workers in the form of property in capital and land, while the masses are only owners of the personal condition of production, of labor power.
You pause again.
If
I'll
the
make it
elements
short.
of production are so distributed,
So let's repeat for ourselves that, look, we do not have to worry about bourgeoisie rights, like right to property, right to good wages, right? Like those kind of rights are the rights that matter for in a private property society. And then the same goes for distribution. If you want to argue and worry about distribution, that itself is still downstream from mode of production. So let's worry about mode of production and the conflicts there, then conflicts in distribution or rights to the product of your labor, which unionists have done. And I think that's kind of what he's foreseeing, that if parties are going to stick to that line of thinking, then you're just going to get a bunch of socialist parties that only care about higher wages, or maybe just see that as the strategy to move forward, but then they kind of hit a wall because then they don't fight for anything better because there's still a priority put on the stability of liberal bourgeois society, which unionists tend to do and did in the 50s.
Right.
Because there's still a nationalism there. It's like, well, we don't want to lose the Cold War, so we can't keep striking like we did in the 30s and 40s, or particularly the strikes tamped down for the sake of winning the war and patriotism. But it's also when socialism was highest because you had the government managing almost all assets. The war economy was so it was brought up in the Socialist Party conference of the policy of rail nationalization. that all rail in America was in fact now like temporarily controlled by the government, because if it was left in private hands, then it would have been a disaster, right? The goods for the war effort would not have gotten to the ports efficiently enough, because you'd have 5 different rail companies jockeying for who's going to get the government contract, right? Or you're just going to create more Trumps, I guess, because it was Trump's father in terms of housing and barracks. But in that case, those were assets that were being created versus assets that just needed to be managed, I guess, and nationalized. But they were temporarily nationalized. And the rail unions, they have this on their docket, rail nationalization. But the critique there is that they still want freight and Amtrak to be separate and not one conglomerated, one rail agency, so that you can manage things, and that, because otherwise freight's still going to come before passenger trains, and we kind of want some equity there.
Yeah.
It doesn't solve that issue. And the other thing is that they want to, like, nationalization means paying out to all of the rail oligarchs, you know, money that they totally earned and deserve.
Right. All right, let's see how much more we can get done tonight. We got a good portion of it done.
Yeah, we're getting a good pace. I know, three
Only
parts.
about half an hour left.
Distributed, and the present-day distribution of the means of consumption results automatically. If the material conditions of production are the cooperative property of the workers themselves, then there likewise results a distribution of the means of consumption different from the present one. Vulgar socialism, and from it, in turn, a section of the Democrats, has taken over from the bourgeois economists the consideration and treatment of distribution as independent of the mode of production, and hence the presentation of socialism as turning principally on distribution. After the real relation has long been made clear, why retrogress again? Sentence 4, quote, the emancipation of labor must be the work of the working class.
Not where the tax money comes from. It's what we're spending the tax money on. And that's the social democrats, like, they can only go so far. They're arguing about redistributing the tax revenue. But where does the tax revenue come from? Where are the taxes collected? Property values, which require what? Private property, you know, private profit maximization by landowners.
Yep. Indeed.
So, which is why no matter how freaking progressive they are, they still have to defer to, well, we need developers or else there won't be any housing built. Or, like, well, you know, we can't, like, do too much because we can't raise taxes or else the businesses will go away.
Yeah, start eating away at the economy.
They're realists. They're capitalist realists.
Yeah. Yeah, that's for sure.
Because they don't want to go big, because that would require, I don't know, a lot of organizing, but it's also education they haven't gotten. They don't have the
all other classes.
imaginary, academics call it, or the imagination, the ability to imagine.
Can't imagine beyond the
Yeah.
constraints. Yeah.
But what you'd have to do, and but they let be the constraint of, like, what the public would support.
Right.
And, like, the public wants what the public gets what the public wants, but the public also wants what the public gets.
The public is also miseducated about what is possible and what other systems look like. So
like that's where I return to what I was saying before about, like, the education has to come first.
Yeah.
Like any successful campaign, even for socialist policy, succeeds because you have enough people, and that's where the hard work comes in, to go out and educate people, talk to them, converse, just tell them about the new point of view, that could be based, and give them the facts about it. Make sure that your point of view, the education, is based on something real and concrete, something you can point to. Like if we're gonna have a good road diet on our main thoroughfare in town, the Bike Coalition and Walkable Albany have to go to every business owner along Central Avenue and tell them about how losing parking will not lose them business. and they have to point to all the other ways and even the small cities where they did a road diet and it didn't, in fact, it increased their revenue. And even if it didn't, it was the same. Because guess what? 80% of the car traffic isn't stopping. It's just going through town.
It's just passing through. Yeah.
And they need to move to the highway, and that's all the road diet will do. Because you already have all the parking you need, essentially. It's never ever full.
Right.
Along Central Ave, and the side lots are never totally full. It's just inefficient because everyone has their own fucking side lot that's never full.
Right.
But if they just
Ends up
fucking
spreading
share,
things out,
they didn't care.
Yeah.
You know, the fact that one business will like have a chain and they'll put it across their fucking driveway.
Yep.
When they close, so the lot's now empty after 9.
Yeah, unusable.
Yeah.
Are only one reactionary mass, unquote. The first strophe is taken from the introductory words of the Rules of the International, but, quote, improved. There it is said, quote, the emancipation of the working class must be the act of the workers themselves. Here, on the contrary, the, quote, working class has to emancipate what? Quote, labor. Let them understand who can. In compensation, the antistrophe, on the other hand, is a Lassallean quotation of the first water, quote, relative to which, unquote, the working class, quote, all other classes are only one reactionary mass, unquote. In the Communist Manifesto, it is said, quote, of all the classes that stand face to face with the bourgeoisie today, the proletariat alone is a really revolutionary class. The other classes decay and finally disappear in the face of modern industry. The proletariat is its special and essential product, unquote. The bourgeoisie is here conceived as a revolutionary class, as the bearer of large-scale industry, relative to the feudal lords and the lower middle class, who desire to maintain all social positions that are the creation of obsolete modes of production. Thus, they do not form together with the bourgeoisie, quote, only one reactionary mass. On the other hand, the proletariat is revolutionary relative to the bourgeoisie because, having itself grown up on the basis of large-scale industry, it strives to strip off from production the capitalist character that the bourgeoisie seeks to perpetuate. But the manifesto adds that the, quote, lower middle class is becoming revolutionary, quote, in view of its impending transfer to the proletariat, unquote. Comment. In other words, capitalism proletarianizes the population. So you have all these classes left over from previous pre-capitalist modes of production, and they're all bound for the proletariat. That is the process of proletarianization. Eventually, advanced capitalism simply becomes the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. That is the process of proletarianization.
Small business owners
eventually
fear being workers.
Yeah, that's their biggest fear.
And to escape being a worker, you need to be a small business owner.
Right. You need to exploit as many workers as possible.
I get a certain anxiety when I see that in action, where you have people wanting to raise up their community and become small business owners. When others show up to patronize them, they're like, yeah, the community's showing up. We're supporting each other.
Supporting that small business, yeah.
Like, well, he'll sponsor, that, and that small business owner will then sponsor the basketball tournament.
Sure.
By buying the tents and water and stuff.
Yep.
That's giving back.
Giving back.
But it's not. Yeah. But it's so fucking inefficient, and it's not an equitable relationship, even when they even when it is all black people.
Absolutely.
Because that's what Black Wall Street was, and that wasn't freaking equitable. That was just.
It still just works for a handful of people.
Yeah, and that was based on the white-owned oil industry. Black Wall Street that was trickled down. Their businesses were in service, or at least runoff wealth from the whites, and calling it Black Wall Street is just because that's as good as it could get for black people then, which is commentary on the racism of America.
Absolutely.
But also the economic relations. Because you had a bunch of poor blacks that remained poor blacks.
Yeah, they just had a
'Cause
different.
otherwise, why didn't Black Wall Street rebuild itself? Well, actually, it did. It wasn't actually destroyed by the riot because they had insurance. They could rebuild. It was actually the same deindustrialization in the 40s that destroyed Black Wall Street. So, in my eyes, like, you could build up your black community businesses, but then depression will come around and it'll all be gone. It was temporary. It was temporary. And you're setting up the next generation to be like, I don't know. They had it good for a bit, but then they'll be the next, like, they'll be reactionaries and
Right.
just want that back.
Very much.
Advanced capitalism simply becomes the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, basically. And of those two major classes, the proletariat is the revolutionary one. The capitalists were revolutionary in comparison to the feudal monarchs, and the proletariat created by the bourgeoisie's system, capitalism, is revolutionary because we're basically the ones that inherit society, and our task is to strip production of the capitalist character that the bourgeoisie, as Marx says, seeks to perpetuate. So, in other words, the lower middle class is becoming revolutionary in view of its impending transfer to the proletariat. In other words, not because of its current class interests, but because of its likely future ones that it can see. Anyway, continuing. From this...
All right, we should probably leave it about there for tonight. Got a good chunk of it done. Let's see how much we got left. Just 25 minutes or so. Pretty good. This is an enjoyable read, though. I like this. I like the way he's kind of picking apart the arguments of democratic socialists and saying that it's never going to be enough. Never going to take us all the way there.
Even though, like, what we read, because when we read the Gotha program, like, our first instinct was, well, yeah, this is sort of basic socialist slogans and tenets, right? Right? Well, yeah, but that's sort of like, it's the pollution of a lot of, like, half-baked ideas and idealism. Or it is material, but it's just like, it's not the full picture.
Right.
And Marx is like, well, there's a bit more to it. And that leads to a different, I don't know if it, like, the big question for us is, like, does that change your strategy? If it just means there's more steps and you need to kind of work on distribution and then we can work on the mode of production. But the point of revolution is that you are in being I always have to be reminded of this whenever I'm at a socialist conference, it's usually, or a lefty conference, and there needs to be more of them. And we need to have a left-wing Netroots Nation or something like that.
Awesome.
I'm really tired, and they happen like every 5 or 10 years, and they're not happening enough. Or a left electoral one occurred in 2016 or in the Bernie years.
Yeah, just some kind of big gathering.
But that was the millennial left, and the millennial left just not just, but 4 years ago liquidated itself. That died. So now we're not doing those conferences. But when I'm there, to close out, that I'm reminded that, like, being revolutionary means you want a new government, right? Not to destroy the government, you want a new government. And that comes in the form of a constitutional convention. Because a new government will have a new constitution. Sort of like Bolivia. When they become more socialist in character, they write a new constitution. The Soviet Union would form a new constitution. And the Constitution lays out, just like our current one, is the statement of principles and all that in the form and the structure of our government and how sacrosanct it is, and that it is still sacrosanct to certain classes of people, but fewer and fewer. When there's hand-wringing about how we may lose the Constitution and the Constitution is at stake, and all this unconstitutional stuff, and maybe more and more are conceding that the Constitution isn't effective anymore. It isn't really good for our times. It isn't the government we need, and it's not effective government. It is not able to address our crises. We do need a new government. We need a new Constitution.
Yeah.
And we need to embrace that and say it loud and proud and say, like, yes, on the agenda, actually, before any of the socialism stuff, is a constitutional convention where we reformat the government so that socialists can have a say and that we do have the tools, or that's even an option. Because currently we have a bourgeois constitution and it isn't an option. You can't do socialism. You can do redistribution through taxes, but that is the limit. Social democracy.
Yep.
And that's the realism that hems in all of our organizing.
Yeah.
So it's but to get to support for a constitutional convention means that revolutionary movement, and how we build that. And that is done through the non-reformist reforms and inside outside and all the other things discussed, and I suppose. But that's what's in front of us, and I can only work with that.
Absolutely.
So far. We have to work with what we have.
We do. That's true. All right. Anything big
Anyway.
coming up for you?
Well, I'm doing, a month ago I started this, but I've barely scratched the outreach. But doing a Green Party picnic. I think I'll consider a success if 10 people show up. It's at that level, but that's fine. Social event. It's not like I'm putting hundreds of dollars into it. I haven't.
Yeah.
So, and we're not renting anything, so it's not like if only 10 people show. But that's the thing. If you keep the stakes low, you won't work hard to make sure it's like 20 people or 30 people. But we don't have a baked-in organization with membership who are just like, yes, I need to come out to this. I have to put on my calendar 3 months ahead of time, like the Labor Day picnic or something.
Right.
This was just on the loo, like, let's do something in the summer because we don't usually. And we want to do something to invite the people who petitioned. So I do need to reach out to them. I totally procrastinated the last 2 weeks on phone banking. But I started doing it. I'm doing it just a half an hour at a time. That's my compromise with myself, I suppose. Since, there's always more time, but then now it's 100 days left to the election, so it's, I really need a phone bank and tell people, go to the Stein website, help out however you can. It's not going to be through us. We're not even an official local yet. And I'm not in a state to coordinate because we don't have the infrastructure. But the Stein campaign does. That's what makes them a presidential campaign worth anything, is that it has an infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And that the Green Party, when we do our convention, even though it costs like $100 flat, we have full room, virtual rooms, and we have 3 talks at the same time. The socialist one was the SP one was just some Zoom calls, and there was 2 at a time at most, but not a lot of people, and they're not well formatted. Like when we began, there should have been a go around. There should have been a statement or a speech. There was not. It was just like chit chat. Very very cash, very cash.
Nice.
Which I guess is kind of what people want.
No,
I don't
that's
know.
good.
But,
It needs to be both
but
social.
if I'm gonna
and
pay
social.
dues to an organization, I kind of want to see some something there.
Mm-hmm.
I want to see more than just some discussion groups.
I agree. But it takes that too. People gotta feel each other out and make sure they're gonna invest in something that's gonna actually go somewhere. So
But conversely,
serve that purpose.
I don't invest in something unless there's some competence there, and then of course that's be seen as a catch-22. The Greens competent? Well, some ways they are compared to partisan parties. As PSL.
PSL,
PSL.
CPUSA.
CPUSA. I mean, I think each of them are trying to improve themselves. Like there was a chapter in Texas that just broke, or they were kicked out because they didn't want to endorse the Democrats. Right. They want the CP to be the CP.
Right.
And but then you have this Revolutionary Communist Party org that's doing their kickoff, and they got this pretty robust looking activist base. Still about 1,000 people or so, but hey, they're loud and they're robust and they're thinking and stuff, so it kind of it's attractive.
Very cool. Well, I'm going to be out of town next week. I'm going to be up in Alaska for a family vacation. I'll have my computer with me, so I mean, there's a chance I'll still be able to stream, but
You should just enjoy the wildlife while you can.
yeah, yeah,
Speaking of,
yeah.
are there wildfires in the west or the north again?
Ooh, good question. I don't know.
I've heard we're not getting smoke like last year, but I think we're getting some drift, and it's affecting everybody's allergies.
Allergies have been pretty bad
Here in New
where
York,
we are.
so maybe it's Canada. We were joking about it at work.
Oh my. Well, according
Anyway,
to fireweatheravalanche.org, there are a bunch of fires out in the west right now.
they usually don't affect New York.
And yeah, I'm not seeing. Oh, wait a minute. It's hard to read this legend, but bunch of activity,
Mm.
kind of in the Midwest, kind of in a southeasterly swoop down towards the Carolinas.
Well, it probably wouldn't be going up. No, it actually does carry up to us. Well, in the winter it does. I don't know if it does in the summer. It's usually the opposite. But then again, a lot of hot air gets blown our way now.
Sure.
The other thing, somebody joke about. Whatever. Let's retire. Past 10.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on. I appreciate your analysis as always.
I always enjoy platform and just the fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like it's a
some
nice
fun
little
time.
break. It's a nice little break, intellectual break.
There you go. All right. Well, have a good one, and we will reconvene in a couple weeks then.
Okay. Later.
See ya. All right. I'm gonna stop presenting that. So that was Critique of the Gotha program. You can find that channel, Socialism for All, on YouTube. Let's see. How many people we got on now? Probably not that many people on at the moment. Just one viewer. So we'll shout someone out from Twitter. See who's currently streaming. Let's see. Let's see what Squidideer is up to. Looks like they may be winding down, so we'll find someone else. Who is on right now? Man, online left has been diminished so much during the Biden administration. Probably emblematic of the left in general, but you never know. But it just kind of puts into perspective the idea that 4 more years of Democrats will be 4 more years of organizing against fascism, because it probably won't be the case. 4 more years of brunches, more likely. I hate to be cynical about it, but that just seems to be the way it's going. So hey, on a happier note, why don't we shout out riff tracks? That's always fun. If you like Mystery Science Theater and that sort of thing, then you're definitely gonna like riff tracks. So I will shout them out as soon as I am able here. What are they watching? Some weird. What are they watching right now? I can't even tell. Oh wow, they are watching Battlefield Earth. The L. Ron Hubbard story. Horrible, horrible movie with no, I can't think of his name. John Travolta as a 9-foot alien. So yeah, shout out to Riff Tracks. I'm just gonna put the whole thing in the chat because if you're seeing this, you're probably coming later on. You're not current, so that'll probably be easier to follow. Check out Rift Tracks on Twitch. They are live 24/7. Man, that looks like a good one. I may watch that myself. Alright, well, it's been a lot of fun. And not going to see you all this Sunday, most likely. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. There's probably going to be downtime while we're in Alaska, so, you know, if there's a stream, it's going to be more than likely pretty spontaneous. And, yeah, we'll just go from there. So, have a good one, everybody, and see ya when I see ya.